Hello, my Bill for 1000 Nation. How's everyone doing today? Okay, on today's video, we're going to do things a little differently. I know I normally do 3 to 4 videos from different channels, but today I decided I would do 3, maybe 4 videos from MrBallen's Halloween Scare-A-Thon from last year. Just do something a little different because honestly, I've seen like maybe one of them. I haven't seen them all. So if you haven't seen them all, or if you just want to just do like a little recap, feel free to give it a watch with me. So as always, let's get into it. Turn them lights down low, put on something comfy, cut up with someone special. Let's get spooky. This one is titled Top 3 Scariest Forest Stories, Halloween Scare-A-Thon, Part Uno.
Before you skip today's video, just watch the top story. It's called Turn Around. Watch it start to finish so you can see the ending. And then once you've seen the ending, watch it again. It is so creepy when you know what was actually going on the whole time they were there. But before I get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to spot the like button on their next set of bench press, and then as soon as they start to fatigue, walk away. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads.
Okay.
All right, let's get into today's stories. In the early 2000s, a teenager named Eben and his father would regularly go hunting in the Georgia backcountry. When Eben turned 14, his father befriended a very wealthy landowner in Georgia who offered them access to one of his best private hunting areas. And just a couple of days later, on October 5th, Eben and his father would take him up on the offer. They woke up super early and they drove out to the edge of this property that was actually fenced in. And they went to a main gate where they had the combo that this guy had given them. They punched in the combo, opened up the gate, drove in, shut the gate, locked it, and then continued down the access road. They followed this road for about 2 miles where it came to a stop right outside of this huge forest. They parked their truck, they got out, they put on their gear, and in the pre-morning darkness began hiking into the woods. Even though they were there primarily to hunt, Eben and his father secretly enjoyed just hiking around the woods and camping out, and any chance they got to extend their hunting trips, they would, even if the hunting wasn't good. And so since they spent a ton of time in the woods together, they noticed almost immediately when they walked into this particular forest that something was off. There's no birds, there's no animals, silence. It's just totally silent. The only sounds they heard that were not them was a single plane that passed overhead. Although they found this very odd, they figured, you know what, this is private property, not a lot of people are out here. I'm sure as soon as we showed up, the animals were aware of us, and they scattered. They finally make it out to the hunting stand that the owner had told them about. They get all settled in, they're getting ready to see some animals, and all day long, they don't see a single animal. They don't hear a single animal. In fact, again, it is just completely silent. Frustrated, they began packing up their stuff, making their way down off the stand, and they started looking for a place to make camp for the night. And Eben's father suggested, well, hey, there's obviously nothing over here. It's been quiet all day. Why don't we walk deeper into the woods a little ways, set up camp there, so tomorrow we have a better chance of seeing some animals. So they hiked for about an hour farther away from where they parked their truck, and they reached this clearing, which is perfect for setting up their camp. And so they set up their tent, and Eben's father says, hey, we still got some daylight. Do you want to go try our luck and see if we can see some animals out here now? Eben's like, yeah, why not? So they hike a little ways away from their campsite, and they set up their blind, and once again, they don't see any animals. It's totally quiet. And so they turn around and they start heading back. As soon as they could see their campsite, which really was just their tent, they noticed that their tent was now collapsed. And Eben's father turns to him and says, oh, it must have been the wind. And Eben says, No, it couldn't have been the wind, because all day today we have been commenting on how quiet it is and how the fact that there's no weather, no wind, no anything is heightening the fact that it's completely silent. So it could not have been wind. So Eben's father is like, well, when you set the tent up, did you not put the posts into the eyelets? Did you not build it correctly? And Eben's like, no, I've made that tent like 1,000 times. I know it was set up correctly. They walk into their campsite and they look down at their tent, and they're really confused at what they see. The two rods that go in an X over the top of the tent that thread through nylon loops and then anchor at 4 different points on the base of the tent, well, they had been removed from the 4 corners. And if you know how a tent works, it works on tension. And once you have a rod anchored in 2 points, it doesn't just pop out. It's anchored at 2 sides. It's actually difficult to remove.
It really is. Okay. Some tents, they have that little eyelet. You just stick the piece in. That doesn't look right. I'm still going to do it. But you stick the piece in and it holds it. Like you literally have to grab it, kind of pull the rod, and pull the piece down. Now some of them have the little piece that goes up into the rod. That does not look right. Oh, son of a. Okay. But it goes up in there. And those are even more difficult to get out because, you got to kind of like and pull them apart. But yeah, there is a lot of I go camping constantly. And we actually got a new tent. And you feel like you're going to break it. Like you really do. No, it's not just going to plop out.
Each anchor. Once one is out, the other comes out easily. But basically, the rod would need to break in order for it to come out of those anchor points, or someone would have to come over and remove it. And they didn't remove them, and none of the rods were broken. Which leaves them with either they failed to set up their tent, even though they had distinct and clear memories of setting it up and double checking it was set up, because they put gear inside of it, or someone came over to their campsite while they were gone and undid the 4 corners. They decide, you know what, it can't be some stranger coming over here because we're the only ones with the gate combo. This is private property and no one could have been here. And why would they do that if they came to our campsite? Why would they randomly collapse our tent and then vanish? So it had to be us. We must have not made the tent. And while they didn't really believe that they had not made their tent, they convinced themselves that that's what happened because the alternative was just too bizarre and frankly terrifying to consider. So they build their tent and they make a little fire and they stay up for a little while chatting before being tired and saying, okay, let's just go to bed. They extinguish the fire, they get in the tent, and they both fall asleep. A couple hours later, Eben wakes up suddenly and he's not sure if he's dreaming or not, but he thinks he hears someone laughing a couple hundred meters behind their tent off in the woods. Eben instinctively turns to make sure his dad is still in the tent with him, and he is. And then Eben starts listening really intently to what's happening outside. And all he can hear is silence, like it's been since they got in the woods. He doesn't hear any more laughter, and so he says, okay, I must have just been dreaming, and there wasn't any laughter out there, and eventually Eben goes back to sleep. A little while later, Eben wakes up suddenly again, except this time his dad is already awake and looking around anxiously. And Eben sits up and goes, what's going on? And his dad goes, shh, and he goes, can you hear that? And Eben listens, and to his horror, he hears laughing. He wasn't dreaming before. Eben also realizes the laughter is not coming from the same area.
Oh, no. No. I would have pooed everywhere. That's creepy. Oh. No.
He heard it. It's now coming from the opposite direction, and it's a lot closer to them. Eben very quietly and carefully explains to his dad that he actually heard this laughter a couple hours earlier. And Eben's father turns to Eben and says, before we came out here, I asked the owner, should we expect any other hunters or campers or anybody nearby? And the owner said, this is private property, and it's fenced in. There is no one there but you guys. After this revelation, they both turn their attention back to just listening, because they're hoping this is just going to stop, and whatever this is just going to leave. But it doesn't leave. They hear footsteps running towards them from way off in the forest, and it's so quiet, it's really easy to hear these footsteps. And whatever this is charging towards them, and then it comes to a complete stop right at the edge of their clearing. At this point, Eben is now grabbing onto his father. Eben's father is holding onto his rifle, and he's getting ready to open the tent to confront whatever is out there. And right before he grabs the zipper, this person, whatever it is, starts laughing again, and it's practically right on top of them. It's so loud. They can hear it clear as day right there, right outside their tent. And Eben's father takes a deep breath. He grabs the zipper, and as soon as he begins moving it, the sound the zipper made causes the laughter to stop. They don't hear footsteps, so they know probably something's still out there. But the laughter stops like it's recognized that they're making noise. They're right there. There they are. They're in the tent. Eben's father freezes with his hand on the zipper, and he's debating whether he should go outside or not. And before he can even make that decision, whatever this thing is turns around and runs back into the woods, and it's just gone. And for several minutes, they just sit like that in total silence, praying that whatever this is gone for good. And after several minutes, when they don't hear anything, there's no more laughing, there's no more running, Eben's father re-zips up the tent, puts his hand back down, and they're both left just sitting there thinking, what the heck just happened? Eben and his father would stay up all night, and they would barely speak, because whatever this thing was had heard them when they moved the zipper. And so they were really afraid of making any sound, even little sounds, because it's so quiet, sound travels really far, and they don't know who or what is out there. And so in silence, holding their guns, they're just waiting for the sun to come up. And as soon as it did, they were up and out of there, literally running out of the forest, checking over their shoulder the whole time, all the way back to their truck. And so to this day, they have no idea who or what the heck was running around out there. And they told the owner of the property about it, and the owner just said, it's not possible. We have a totally gated-in private piece of property, and there are cameras watching the only entrance. And you are the only ones that went in or out over that time period, and prior to that, we monitor this property. Nobody else was in there.
You're wrong, bro. No, there's something there. I don't know if I would have came out of the tent shooting or if I would have stayed in the tent pooping. Oh, ooh. Yeah, that would have been a messy situation.
In the summer of 2013, a young woman named Katie and her father decided to go camping at one of their favorite campgrounds in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. Katie loved going camping with her father because he was this totally accomplished outdoorsman, and he used to be a wilderness guide for much of his life, and so she just always felt like she was in great hands whenever she was out in the wild with him, and she had kind of become a fairly accomplished outdoorswoman herself. When they arrived at the campground, the parking lot was packed with cars. And they're like, shoot, I wish we'd called ahead a couple weeks ago and reserved the site because they're probably not even available now. But they went to the front desk and they were like, you're in luck, we have one available, but it's the one that's way over there. It was this one campsite that was kind of isolated from the rest of the campground. It was far away from the bathhouse, it was far away from where you go swimming, and it was far away from the parking lot. It was just like really inconvenient. And whenever they came camping here, it was like the one site they didn't want to use. But beggars can't be choosers. They were happy to even have a site. And so they drove all the way down this little road into this very isolated campsite, kind of in the middle of this forest. Once they got there, they began setting up their respective tents because they were not going to be staying in the same tent. They each had these very small backpacking tents, which were so small that you could either zip it up all the way and stay warmer and more protected, but you had to sleep in a ball because your legs would not fit otherwise. Or you could unzip the front of your tent, and when you lay down, you could extend your legs fully, but your legs are protruding outside of your tent. So you could only do that in warmer weather and if you were comfortable having your legs poking out into the wilderness. After they set up their tents and they get their coolers set up and they have all their stuff kind of the way they want it, they go out hiking for the rest of the day. When they come back, they're totally exhausted, they fall asleep, and nothing of note occurs over that first night. The next day they get up, they go back out, they go hiking all day all over again, and they come back that night and they are totally exhausted again. And they get into their tents and they go to bed. This night, something of note would happen. At about 3 a.m., Katie wakes up and she hears footsteps walking towards the campsite from a little ways off. They're in the woods somewhere. And she's thinking, okay, it's got to be my father because he's diabetic and every night he gets up to go to the bathroom maybe 3-4 times, and he probably was just walking to the bathhouse and now he's walking back. But she realizes the bathhouse is over here, not over here. So what is he doing walking towards the campsite from this side? The footsteps come out of the tree line, they come into the clearing that is their campsite, and they stop about 2-3 meters outside of Katie's tent. Now, there were no windows on Katie's backpack tent. There was just little vents at the front and the back that kind of pointed down, and so she couldn't see out anyways, and there was no illumination out, so you can't even pick up a silhouette. It's just total darkness out there. She can't see who's out there. She can only hear them. But she's thinking, okay, maybe my dad got lost coming back from the bathhouse because he didn't have a flashlight and he walked too far. That's possible. Or, he could have decided to relieve himself just in the tree line, even though he's not known to do that. He's a guy that goes to the bathhouse. And so she's running through these scenarios that are convincing her that, oh, that's just my dad. But what she really wants to hear is that person walk away from her tent and get into her father's tent, because that will confirm in her mind that that was her father. And so she's sitting here waiting for that confirmation, and she hears the footsteps again, but instead of walking around her tent to her father's tent, this person walks right up against her tent very quickly. And they clearly begin leaning over her little tiny tent because she can hear them breathing right above her. And this is when she realizes, that's not my dad. And as she's having this terrible revelation that some stranger is outside her tent right now, she has an even worse revelation. It was a warm night that night, so she was sleeping with her tent unzipped and her legs poking out the end. She musters the courage to begin slowly retracting her legs back inside of her tent.
Get a bigger tent. No. I would be so freaked out right now. Look, I love camping. I'm a bigger dude, and I would never sleep with my body parts hanging out of my tent in any way, shape, or form. I don't care if it's hot. I will take the rain fly off, and I know it's just a screen and a thin tent, but it's a comfort thing. I would be pooping everywhere.
But before she's able to do that, this person stands up, turns, and starts walking towards the base of her tent where her legs are. She's completely frozen and terrified about what's about to happen. But this person doesn't stop at her feet. They keep moving and, in fact, start circling her tent. But because they were making a lot of noise and walking around her, it allowed her to pull her legs back into her tent without, this person hearing her. And so she had the illusion of safety being inside of her tent, but her tent is still unzipped. So she's waiting for this person to come around and crouch down and look inside of her tent because it's open. And so she's just looking down there hoping that doesn't happen. But unfortunately, right at this moment, the person walked to the base of her tent and came to a stop, right outside where the opening to the tent is. And so she's sitting there thinking, please don't come in here, please don't come in here, please don't come in here. And even though her feet are pulled up into her tent, she suddenly feels something pinch her foot, and she knows it's a hand. Something has grabbed my foot. And she stifles a scream, and she starts shaking uncontrollably because her instincts are telling her, don't let this person know you're awake. And luckily, as she's sitting there shaking from fear and trying to be quiet as best as she can, she's holding her mouth. This person stands back up again and goes back to the spot next to her tent and leans over the tent once again, and she can hear them breathing right over her. And so for several minutes, she lay there shaking with this random person who pinched her foot a minute ago, hovering over her tent in the middle of the night. And she has nothing she can do. And she's just quiet. She's hoping it's going to end soon. And eventually this person would turn around and walk over to their cooler and their table and some other things that were out. And she hears some rummaging going on. Some things are being moved around. And then this person just kind of walks off into the distance. But she doesn't know if they're gone. She doesn't know if they're standing in the edge of the tree line waiting for her to come outside. Maybe they laid a trap for her. And so she just lays there, silent, doesn't move, and she's praying to herself, please don't let anything happen to me or my father. And all night she's just laying there. And then eventually she does fall asleep. Probably hours go by, but she does fall asleep because she wakes up again when she hears her father unzipping his tent. And she charges out to meet him. And she can tell right away that he's scared. And before she can even say or begin to describe what's happened to her, he says, were you outside your tent last night at about 2, 3 in the morning? Because I heard all sorts of commotion near our cooler. I wasn't sure if it was an animal. I wasn't sure if it was you. And she starts telling him, no, this is what happened to me. And as she's describing what happened to her, he looks behind her at the picnic table, which was next to their cooler, and they had their backpacks on it. Basically anything that didn't fit in their tents they kept near this picnic table. And he points at it. And she turns around, and any item that was in the cooler or in their backpacks or that was just out has been stacked in a pyramid formation on this table. Clearly, the guy who was here last night did this for some reason they don't understand. And as they go over to look at it to see if anything's been taken, they notice this track of footprints, and these heavy footprints that have been going around and around Katie's tent. So she clearly wasn't imagining it. And so that instant, they packed everything up, got in their car, and they left. And to this day, they can barely talk about it with each other because it's all the things that could have happened. The father felt horribly guilty because he clearly heard this person but didn't leave his tent. And his daughter was clearly in danger. And his daughter's thinking, the tent was open. This person was crouched down, reaching into my tent, grabbing my feet. Like, that's such a horrifying image. And so this has been completely traumatizing for them, and they just don't talk about it anymore.
I wouldn't either.
From the 1950s until present, a Canadian family has owned this very isolated cabin in the middle of the Ontario backcountry. It was the only property on this very small lake. There was two others across the lake, but they were pretty far away. And with the exception of the side of the cabin that was facing the water, the rest of it was surrounded by really dense forest that went on for quite a while. About 2 miles away from this cabin, on the other side of this dirt road, was this huge wildlife reserve that was pretty much just a huge forest that was protected. And anytime the family was visiting this cabin, the kids would at some point go into the reserve and go explore. In 2001, when the family was at the cabin, the kids were across the road over at the reserve, and they decided to walk down this particular trail that they hadn't seen before, and they just started walking. And for about 30 minutes, they're seeing new areas they hadn't seen before, and then they come to this clearing, and there's all these abandoned houses. At first, there was a little debate about whether these were actually abandoned, because they did look like they were in pretty good condition. But when they walked a little bit closer, it became very clear that nature is reclaiming this land. Grass is up to your waist. There's vines growing up the side of the houses. There were cars still parked in driveways that were totally rusted out, and grass is growing all through them. And so they knew these were abandoned. They walked up to the first house they saw, and they looked in, and they couldn't believe what they were looking at. It was like whoever lived here had left without taking anything. The house was still totally furnished. In fact, their dining room table still had plates and cups and forks and knives.
What kind of situation will take place to where somebody on the island, just away from everyone, what's going to happen to where you just leave everything? I mean, they had cars and stuff, so what was they doing? What? I don't understand this. I don't.
They just had dinner and then just got up and left. They start talking about going into these houses and looking around inside, but they started wondering, is this a museum? Is that why everything is in such good repair? Should we not go inside these houses? And they start looking around for any indication that definitely this is not a museum. These are just plain abandoned. And across the street from the house they were at was this totally decrepit looking house. Let's go over there and look in there. And so they look in a window, and very clearly the ceiling is totally sagging down. And the first floor is buckling completely, and there's clothes and shoes scattered everywhere. And so for them, this was confirmation that this is no museum. These are abandoned. We can totally go look around inside. And so for the next couple of hours, the kids explored all the houses that looked structurally sound, that weren't going to collapse on them. And it was just fascinating. There was all this stuff that was left behind that was fairly valuable. And they didn't take anything. They just thought it was very cool. And after a while, they decided they had seen enough, and they turned around and headed back to their cabin. After they got back, they told their parents about what they found, and their father was like, man, that sounds awesome. I want to go check that out. And so that day, they went right back over to the abandoned houses. The first house they showed him was the really decrepit-looking one where the ceiling was sagging and there was women's shoes and clothes all over the ground, to show him for sure these are abandoned, because we had some doubts at first too. These are definitely abandoned. So they look at that house, and then they went back to the very first house they saw when they walked into this complex, the one that was in great condition and had the dining table still set. So they go inside and they go upstairs, and they find this bedroom that, like everything else in the house, is totally intact. You got pictures on the wall. It's fully furnished. There's even still sheets made on the bed. In the pillow, it's got a head imprint from whoever was there last. And at the foot of the bed is this beautiful fur coat. And the father walks over to it and he looks at it and he's like, this is real fur. This is a really expensive coat. I want to take this for our family. But before he took it, he had a hesitation. Is this really abandoned? You know, if someone had been here, they would have seen footprints all over the house just because there's grime all over the ground, and they can clearly see their footprints from where they've just come in. And he's like, no, this is just a weird situation. It's definitely abandoned, and finders keepers. And so he picks up the jacket and he says, I'm going to give this to mom after I clean it up. And so with the jacket in hand, the father and the kids explore the rest of the house. And when they go outside, they realize it's starting to get late and it's probably time to head back. And so they turn around and they start walking away from these houses towards their cabin. And they get about 50 or 60 meters away when one of the kids said, he just had this weird sense that they were being watched. And so he turns around and is shocked when he sees there is an old woman standing in the bedroom that they had just been in, where the fur coat was. She's got a loose bun on the top of her head. She's got this blue shawl on her shoulders over a cream blouse, and she's glaring at them. When the kids saw this woman, he made an audible gasp, and the rest of the group turned around too and saw this woman in the window. And the feeling was guilt. They're like, oh my goodness.
Wrong turn stuff right here. Yep, they're going to get ate. I mean, am I wrong? Does that or does that not remind anyone else of like a really good beginning to Wrong Turn? Just saying.
He just stole from this poor woman who lives in this abandoned house. And so right away, the whole group starts walking right back towards the house. They're going to give this jacket back. In fact, the dad is like, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have taken this. I'm sorry. And as they're walking back towards the property, the woman in the window who hasn't said anything just turns around and walks back into the main part of the house. They can't see her anymore. And so as they're walking closer to the house, they're assuming she's going to come downstairs to retrieve this jacket that they've taken from her. And so they get right up to the front door, and the father is yelling to her, I'm sorry, where do you want me to leave this jacket? I can bring it in to you. And they're kind of just waiting for her to come downstairs, and she doesn't. She's nowhere to be found. She's not making any sound. She's not indicating what to do. And so after waiting for a couple of minutes, the kids don't really know what to do, and they're kind of getting uneasy about the situation. And the father is still very confident that he just wants to give this back and make amends, make peace with her, say he's sorry. And so he walks inside. He tells his kids, stay here. I'm going to go give it to her. And he goes inside and he disappears upstairs. And then all of a sudden, from across the street in that decrepit house with the caved-in ceiling, they hear one of the second-floor windows come slamming down. And at the same time, their dad comes charging down the stairs, no jacket with him, and he's saying, go, go, go. And the kids are spooked from the window getting slammed, and they start running away until they're about 100 meters away from these houses. And they stop, and they're panting, and they're out of breath. And the kids ask their dad, what happened? And he says to them, I looked everywhere upstairs and I could not find that lady. I don't know where she is. Either she's hiding from us or something, but I happened to be looking out at that other house. Something caught my eye. There was movement, and I saw another person in the second floor of that building that's falling apart. And I watched them slam the window, and then as soon as I did, I heard someone yell, get out. And I ran out after you guys. Now, the kids and the dad are absolutely terrified, and they want to leave, but they also want one more look at these buildings before they do.
No!
And when they had run away, they had stopped behind this big group of trees that obscured their view to the buildings. They were out of sight. And so they begin to peek their heads around the tree until they can see the building, and they can't believe what they see. Standing in the window of the fur coat room is not only the old woman, but also a very tall man who's holding her shoulders and is bending down because his head is too high to look standing. He's crouched down, he's looking out the window next to her, and they're both glaring towards them. The father and his kids are practically falling over themselves to sprint away and back to their cabin. To this day, that family has no idea who those people were, what they were doing there, how they were able to move around without making any noise and consistently hide from them and not leave any footprints. It was all very strange and terrifying stuff. And then the government ended up demolishing those houses almost immediately after they were there. And so they'll never get any answers because everything's gone. So that's going to do it, guys. Let me know in the comments what you...
That's crazy. I like that, though. That was creepy. That one was creepy. Ooh. Oh, no. No, I'm telling you, that's some Wrong Turn stuff. Now that those houses are destroyed, I wouldn't go back to that island. I wouldn't. That made them angry, tore down their houses. Bad things going to happen. Nope. All right. Nope. All right. Nope. Hold on. I just need a second. I would have pooed. Oh, God. Okay. Now, this is top 3 scariest stalker stories. Halloween Scare-A-Thon Part 2. Altogether, I think there is 11. We're not doing 11 today. We're probably going to do like 3 every Friday until it's done.
Don't forget, we survived for 200,000 years without being anywhere near the top of the food chain. And our ancient ancestors were able to do that by developing survival instincts. And those survival instincts are still buried in our subconscious today. So when you have a bad feeling about something, like something's wrong here, I don't know what it is, you should listen to that because it might just save your life. Before I get into today's stories, if you're a fan of The Right Place, because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times.
Okay. I do get those feelings sometimes. I'm sure we all do. But I have literally had those feelings like, okay, little tangent, little story here. Me and my wife went to see her dad before Christmas, and we was going to go spend actual Christmas Day with her mom. Okay, so we go down. We spend the day before Christmas Eve and the first part of Christmas Eve with her dad. And we're coming back up this way, and now her mom lives in Pikeville, Kentucky. Her dad lived in Flemingsburg, Kentucky. He don't live there no more, but that's where he lives. And that's like a freaking 4-hour difference right there. So we drive from here to Flemingsburg the day before Christmas Eve. The morning of Christmas Eve, we're driving from Flemingsburg straight to Pikeville, Kentucky. Now, the night that we spent at our dad's house, I woke up like horrible dream. Like we was driving somewhere, we got into a horrible wreck. Like it was really bad. Like she got hurt like really bad. I didn't get hurt as bad, but it was still pretty traumatic. So we're on our way up there. It's starting to get dark because it's winter time, so it gets dark relatively early. It's kind of raining. And I look at him like, the next gas station, pull over, I'm taking over driving. She's like, I can do this. It's fine. I've been driving ever since I can remember. I'm like, I understand. I do. I was like, but it's getting bad out. It's cold. That fresh water, it's very dangerous. She says, all right, Billy, whatever you say. You know how women do. Sorry, women, but y'all do that. And the only reason why I want to take over is because I am a very good driver. Like, I don't freak out. I don't panic. If something happens, I know exactly what to do. Plain and simple. My dad is ex-military, so whenever I was learning to drive, I learned from a Marine. I can drive really good. I can do things that most cops and stuff can't do in a minivan, let alone in a car. So on the GPS, there's a gas station like 5 miles ahead of us. And like it's getting to the point where I can actually see the lit up lights to it because it's really dark out and that's the only thing around. As soon as we start coming around a curve, we start hydroplaning. And like it instantly deja vu. Like everything that was happening was what was happening in my dream. So it's like I kind of knew what I needed to do, but I didn't know what the outcome was still going to be for me doing what I had to do. Like, I don't know. I was freaked out. I was scared. Her pants leg gets actually stuck to the gas pedal. So every time like she's pulling, it's pushing the gas. She's pulling this way and it's pushing the gas pedal down that way. How cars do. And it's just hitting the gas. So she's pulling her foot off, trying to still hit the brake, and it just starts spinning. So I instantly pulled up, undid my seatbelt, grabbed a hold of the oh shit handle, put my hand on her, and I'm just kind of got my foot up against the thing, and we just start hitting the guardrail. Every time we hit the guardrail, she goes forward a little bit. She slams on the gas. We spin around again, hit the guardrail again. We hit the guardrail, I guarantee you, like 9 times. That guardrail was messed up by the time she was done. I busted my head off the windshield 3 times, busted it all to pieces. Busted out the passenger window that was on my side with my head. Had some broken ribs. Like, my skull was cracked, like right there. There's scars everywhere on my head. That's what it is. What it is. But she was fine. Like, I held her right in place the whole time, and I finally got to the point where I can lock the emergency brake in place, and I just grabbed her leg and I pulled. I ripped the bottom part of her jeans, but it got her loose from the gas pedal, and we came to a stop, like right in the middle of the road. Cars flying by us on both sides. Look at her. I'm like, are you okay? She's like, yeah. She's like, I hit my knee on the steering wheel, but other than that, yeah, I'm fine. She's like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm good. She's like, no, like, there's blood everywhere. Like, she's like, there's like clear blood running down your face. Looks like you're just stood out in the rain and it's raining blood. Like, there's blood everywhere. I'm like, no, I'm good. Seriously, no lie. It's probably just a bunch of little cuts and stuff. I can open my door. She couldn't open hers. She's freaking out because she can't get out the car. And the way everything's dented in, like, she can't get out onto my side either. So I get out of the car, go over, and I grab hold of the door. I pull the handle, and I just yank it off, and I pop the door up and go like that, and the door comes off into the road. I get her out. I got to cut her seatbelt. Luckily, I always carry a pocket knife at all times. So I cut the seatbelt, get her out, get her over to the side of the road. I shut the doors, and nobody is stopping at all. So I can't get the emergency brake to disengage. So I'm pushing the car over to the side of the road next to the guardrail so no one else hits it because it's dark, it's raining. Someone else can hit it, and there's going to just be more damage. I finally get the car over to the side of the road by myself. This truck pulls up. He's like, buddy, are you okay? Is everyone all right? I'm like, yeah. He's like, are you sure you're covered in blood? And he's like, as I'm coming up, I can see you pushing a car. He's like, the wheels aren't even moving. Like, the emergency brake's still stuck in place. He's like, you and your wife get in the back of my truck, sit down. I'm going to call the police. Police get there, call her mom. And I end up having to go to the hospital because all the cuts and stuff. I couldn't just say, no, I don't want to go. There's like, no, you really kind of have to. Like, you could be seriously hurt. Come find out, I did have a crack in my skull. It was like right there. You can still feel like the little indentation. Had broken ribs, blood everywhere. It was horrible. But I dreamt that. I dreamt the whole situation. It's like I knew what to do. I didn't know what the outcome of it was going to be. I knew what it was if I didn't do something. So I knew the only thing that was left was for me to do something. But I was scared shitless because I didn't know what the outcome of me taking my seatbelt off and doing what I thought I needed to do. Like, was I just going to get flung out the window? Now, I do remember, like, my hand slipping off the oh shit handle that's right here and kind of being out and then pulling myself back in, but everything just happened so fast. I mean, so yes, if he says, go with your gut feeling, because I looked at her today, I was like, I have a bad feeling. Something stupid's going to happen. Let's just stay here at your dad's one more night and we'll go down and we'll just let your mom know that we're coming down and we'll be there Christmas Day. But no, she's like, well, we promised. Okay. Yeah, I know. Let's go ahead and do it. I should have went with the gut. That car was totaled. It was. The insurance people came out there. Was like, yeah, we're going to go ahead and total out the car. There is no fixing that. No. Oh, it was horrible. I was just really glad that the kids wasn't with us. They was at their mother's house because we planned all this ahead. Like, we had the Christmas with the kids the day before. We went down to her dad's, then we had Christmas there, and then we was going to spend actual Christmas Day with her mom. So it was all planned out. Everything went to a T up until that point. Then we end up having to stay like a week down there until all the insurance stuff went through and we can get a rental car and everything else. And we actually had to go to court because it was classified as a failure to control. Yeah, we almost died and we had to pay a ticket. That was
every week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak under the like button's chair and tie their shoelaces together. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. By the summer of 2007, Chris had been working as a park ranger in southeastern Pennsylvania for a number of years, and by and large, he enjoyed his occupation. Some of the time, he got to do what he loved, which was hiking in the forest. And some of the time, it required doing something he hated, which was office work that usually required staying late at night. On one of those late nights, in August of 2007, Chris's boss, Mike, said that he needed to leave the office and go down the access road to this tool shed they had. He needed to get some equipment and bring it back up to the office for some reason, and he said he'd be back in about 15 minutes. As soon as Mike left, Chris decided, you know what, I'm going to take a break from my work and I'm going to step outside for a minute. Right in front of the office building was a little staff parking lot, and then about 50 meters beyond that was the edge of this really dense forest where the access road that Mike had just gone down to get to the tool shed basically split right through the middle and went straight out past the office. When Chris stepped outside to take his break, he sat down on the front steps that overlooked that parking lot and the access road, and he was just kind of looking out towards the forest, not thinking about what he was looking at, just kind of mindlessly sitting there, when all of a sudden he just started to feel like someone's watching me. And instinctively, he turned around to look back into the office, as if maybe someone was behind him, but he remembered that he and Mike were the only ones there that night, so no one's going to be behind him. So he turned back around, and he looked out at the parking lot, and he didn't see any movement, and he looked down to the edge of the forest, which he could see because the moon was fairly bright that night, so the illumination was pretty good. And there was no movement against the tree line, there was no animals, there was no people, and Mike had not come back yet. So there's nothing going on in front of him, there's nothing going on behind him, but he just could not shake this feeling that someone was watching him. And so Chris, he's not easily spooked. He's used to being out in the forest in the daytime and at night. He's used to being at this office. A lot of times he worked at the office on his own at night. So he's used to this environment. And so he thought, you know what, I'm going to go look around. And so he walks down the steps and he walks into the parking lot and he begins looking behind some of the cars. There's only a handful in the lot. There's nothing in the lot. And he keeps walking until he's about 10 meters away from the edge of the forest. And he looks into the forest and it's too dark to see anything. And there's nothing out here. There's no movement. There's no animals. Mike is still not back yet. And so even though he could not shake this sense that someone is watching him, he felt like, you know what? I did my diligence and there's no one out here, so it's just got to be in my head. And so he decides he's going to go back inside. And so he turns around and he starts walking back up towards the office when all of a sudden he hears this whooshing sound come past his head. And he didn't know what it was, but it sounded like someone took a stick and threw it overhand, so it's spinning like a tomahawk as it passed by his head. And because the sound was so loud, and he was already on edge about someone potentially watching him, that he actually dove as soon as he heard it and fell to the ground and scrambled around and looked at the tree line from where this thing came from, but there's no one there. And he scrambles to his feet, and he's still looking around, and he starts backpedaling towards the office with his eyes still on the forest, and his attention kind of shifts from the forest to what was just thrown at me. And he turns around and starts walking around looking for something on the ground, like a stick, to see if something really was thrown at him, but he can't find anything. He didn't do an exhaustive search. He didn't look under every single car, but an initial scan turned up nothing. And then he turns back to the forest and he doesn't see anything out there. And even though, again, he feels totally stressed out, like something's out here and I can't see it, he's like, am I going crazy? Did that really happen? Because I can't find this big stick that apparently flew past my head. So is this all happening in my head? But regardless, he's totally freaked out, and he sprints back inside the office and locks every door. 20 minutes later, Mike comes blazing up the access road. He stops in front of the office and runs up the stairs. Chris goes over, unlocks the door, and he lets him in. And Chris is about to tell him about this crazy stick-throwing incident, but he can tell Mike is really upset about something. Probably more upset about whatever happened to him than Chris is about this stick-throwing thing. And so Chris tables his story. He locks the doors behind Mike, and he turns to him and he says, "What's going on? What's wrong with you?" At first, Mike doesn't say anything. He just paces back and forth inside the office. And then finally, Chris calms him down, and he gets him to explain what happened. Mike tells him that he was down at the tool shed, which is about a half mile down the access road and about 20 meters off the road into the forest. And he's at the shed, it's open, and he's pulling out the different pieces of equipment he's going to bring back to the office. And he says all of a sudden, all the hairs on his body stand up. He's got goosebumps. And immediately he thinks, someone's watching me. And he turns around, and there's no one there. He looks to his right and his left. He kind of pokes his head in the shed, like is someone hiding in the shed? There's no one in there. He walks to the back of the shed. There's no one behind the shed. And he's just totally stumped why he's feeling this way. He goes back to the front of the shed, and he's going over in his mind what made him feel this way. And he can't put his finger on it, but he cannot shake this feeling of someone watching him. And it's making him totally anxious. So he gets all the things he needs from the shed as quick as he can. He locks it up, he turns, and he starts speed walking back out to his truck. When he gets about 5 meters away, he hears footsteps running right to left behind him back where the shed is. And because he was already completely on edge about someone watching him in the woods somewhere, he doesn't even turn around to see what that is. He knows he needs to run to his car and get inside and put steel between him and whatever is out there. Once he's inside, he locks the door, he turns on the ignition, and looks one last time in the direction of where he came from. And to his horror, there is a man walking into the woods right next to the shed, turning the corner behind and disappearing into the woods. His instincts were spot on. He was being watched. And that's when Mike hit the gas and sped back to the office. Chris then tells Mike about his stick-throwing incident because all of a sudden that seems a whole lot more real, and they both agree that whoever threw something at Chris is probably the same guy who was hiding near the shed with Mike. Concerned this guy might come back and break into the office, they stay the night there and they watch the whole time. They don't see him again. And the next morning they file a report and they tell the incoming park rangers what happened. But after this, there were no more reports of this strange hooded figure roaming around the forest. And to this day, Chris and Mike have no idea who he is or what he wanted. But they can both agree, whoever he was bad news.
Screw that ass.
In the summer of 2015, a young man named Paul was on his last day of a 7-day solo backpacking trip through a very remote area in Utah called the Dark Canyon Wilderness. Dark Canyon gets its name from its steep walls that block light in the morning and in the late afternoon. It's an area that's only accessible by foot, and it's not uncommon to go in there and not see another person the whole time you're there. That morning, Paul got up and set off on a day hike that would take him through a very forested area up onto a plateau where he planned to camp out for the night. About a mile into the hike, he found some amazing elk antlers, and he decided he wanted to keep them. So he threw them on his backpack and rested them at the top and continued on his hike. But the added 15 pounds of weight proved to be far more exhausting than he was anticipating, and very quickly he blew through all of his water. Even though he was within 1 mile of his final destination, this plateau, he decided to stop because he was so dehydrated he needed to find water. So he puts his pack down, he puts the elk antlers down, and he starts walking around, and amazingly, he does find some water. Granted, it was kind of a gross puddle of standing water, but he figured, I can boil this, and it should be okay. And as he's preparing a fire to boil this standing water, he figures, you know what, if I'm making a fire here, I might as well just make my camp here. So he sets up his tent, and then he makes a fire, and he's about to start boiling this water when he realizes how dumb he's being. If there's a puddle of standing water right here, then probably just a little ways upstream, there's going to be some running water. Why don't I not boil this crappy water that will only yield, a couple sips of water and go look for the running water where I can drink as much as I want? So he puts the pot down and he leaves all of his gear at the campsite and he begins walking up this mountain to hopefully find a stream. And after about a half mile of walking up this mountain, he finds this little spring. Immediately, he's down on hands and knees, drinking as much water as he possibly can because he's super dehydrated. And after he's drank for quite a while, he reaches down to his belt where he kept his water bottles, and he realized he left all of his gear, including his water bottles, at camp. So he didn't have a way to collect this water. And so he's like, shoot, I got to go back to camp and get the bottle and come back. I'm going to burn a bunch of energy. But he's like, you know what can you do? I need the water. And so he gets up and he turns around and he starts walking back towards his camp. And immediately he starts to feel really anxious as he's walking back. He can't help but feel like someone's behind him watching him. And he kept turning his head, thinking he's going to see someone just over the mountain who's quietly stalking him. And he just could not shake this feeling. And so as he's walking back to camp, every little sound he hears is totally throwing him off. Every little rustling leaf, every little bird overhead, he's totally on edge because he's convinced someone is behind me or someone's over there, someone's watching me. He finally gets back to camp, he gets his water bottles, and he considered not going back to the spring because he didn't want to cover that distance again because of how stressful it just was. But ultimately, he knows he needs the water. So either he's going to sit here for a really long time and boil a bunch of stagnant water, or he can just suck it up, walk to the spring, get some water, come back, and be good. Before he walks up to the spring, he grabs a really big stick to use as a club, and then he walks up. So now he's got some protection. And immediately, as he begins that half-mile trek to the spring, the anxiety pours right back over him, and he can't help but feel like someone is watching him. But he gets up to the spring, he fills his water bottles, he turns around, and he starts walking back, and he walks down this little rock face and lands on the trail he had just been on a minute ago, and he stops because he sees something on the ground that wasn't there before. A fresh mountain lion print is placed right in between two of his footprints that he had just made on his way back to the spring, meaning there's a mountain lion somewhere right around here that's not just watching me, it's hunting me. Paul doesn't really know what to do, so he runs to his campsite and gets in his tent and huddles in his tent for the rest of the night, hoping a mountain lion doesn't attack him. And fortunately, it does not. And what he thinks probably happened was when he picked up those elk antlers and put them on his backpack and was walking around with them, he probably attracted the mountain lion that thought he was an elk and therefore food.
I didn't think of that. Oh my God. No. Nope. No.
In April of 2020, a 17-year-old named Sam, who was an avid outdoorsman, decided to go on a one-night hike in the Superstition Mountains in Arizona. The mountain's name has a bunch of supposed origins, but the one that's generally accepted is people are afraid of the Superstition Mountains because of all the mysterious deaths that have occurred there. And so because people would avoid these mountains in fear of mysterious death, it became these superstitious mountains. But Sam was not superstitious and regularly came out here to go hiking, in particular on this 8-mile loop that went through a canyon. And so this one night overnight he planned on doing was going to be on that 8-mile loop where he'd do 4 miles in, camp out, and then 4 miles back. And he planned to do it with a friend, but his friend at the last minute canceled, and so Sam teetered on not even doing it, but ultimately decided, okay, I'll just do it by myself because I'm very familiar with this area. On the day he was supposed to go do this hike, he had planned on getting there early in the day to have maximum lighting, but due to some unforeseen circumstances and traffic and bad road conditions, he didn't get to the trailhead until 5:45 p.m. that night. Sam knew it was a bad idea to start this hike so late because he was going to run out of daylight. He probably was not going to make it 4 miles to the point where he planned on camping out, but he figured with his good health and fitness, he could probably quickly make his way to the 2 or even 3 mile mark, and there were some suitable campsites there. And so he decided he would kind of risk it and just try to go as fast as he could and use the daylight he had to reach a suitable campsite. But he wasn't able to move as fast as he thought he could, and soon the sun was down and it's totally dark, and he's got his flashlight, but that only is able to shine like 10 feet in front of him. And then at one point, he nearly falls off of this rock, and he knows had he fallen, he would have gotten really badly hurt. And he's 15 miles away from the nearest help. And he's in a bad cell phone service area, and the roads getting out here are treacherous. No one knows exactly where he is. And it dawns on him that you've made a pretty bad choice, and you should stop right now and make camp here and not try to risk it any further. And so as it happened, where he was, there was this forest right nearby, and he could see there was a clearing about 30 feet off the path when he shined his light. And so he walked into that clearing, and he found it was a great spot to make camp. And in fact, on the edge of this clearing was the remnants of a fire pit. It was very old, but it at least showed someone had camped out right here, and they seemed to have made it just fine. So Suddenly he was feeling pretty smart and he felt pretty good about where he was staying for the night. Now, Sam intentionally did not bring a tent. He liked to sleep on a sleeping pad with a sleeping bag over that, and then he would string up a tarp over the top of him in case it rained. And since this clearing was surrounded by a bunch of pine trees, he was able to string up his tarp over the top, and it was perfect. And pretty soon he had a fire going, and then he cracked open a can of beans, and he began eating his dinner. And as he was eating, he started to get a sense that something was off, something was not right. He began scanning the tree line as if he was going to find something out of the ordinary, but his visibility was incredibly limited because he was sitting right up against a fire. And if you've ever sat next to a fire in a dark forest, your visibility is like 5 feet in a circle around the fire. You really cannot see beyond that. And his vision was also limited by all the pine trees that encircled his clearing. So he really could only see what was immediately around him, nothing else. And he starts thinking, that's got to be it. Maybe I'm just nervous because I have no visibility. But as he's rationalizing this kind of bad gut feeling, a rock the size of a marble comes soaring into the campsite and lands at his feet. And he looks down at the rock, and immediately he connects that to that sense of dread he had. And he's looking around a little more aggressively now, but again, his vision is very, very limited. And so for the next 15 minutes, Sam is really aggressively scanning the tree line and listening really intently, and he doesn't hear anything. He doesn't see any more rocks get thrown. And so he begins to rationalize and convince himself that there's nothing wrong here. That feeling I have, oh, don't worry about that. He starts telling himself, I must have kicked a rock. That's what it is. Or maybe a rock fell off a tree. But either way, it's something totally explainable and you got nothing to worry about. And after a little while, he convinced himself and he got into his sleeping bag under his tarp and he went to sleep. A couple of hours later, Sam wakes up and he has that same sense of dread, and now it's back with a vengeance. And he can't hear anything, he can't see anything, but he's definitely feeling like something is wrong. And at that moment, as he's listening really intently and looking really carefully, he hears the sound of rustling leaves. It sounds like someone walking through leaves about 30 or 40 meters away from his campsite. And initially, he can't tell if this person or animal is walking towards his campsite or away, but over the next 30 seconds or so, the sounds start to fade, and he convinces himself that, okay, they've left and everything's fine. But just in case, he wanted to grab his flashlight and shine it in that direction, and so he reaches next to him where he had left it when he had gone to bed a couple hours earlier, and he can't find his flashlight. He's looking around for it, and he can't find it, and he's like, man, that's weird. I had it right here, right next to my body, and it's not here anymore. And that's when the alarm bells start going off in his head, because the only way this flashlight moves is if he moved it. And if it's not here, how did it move? And so he jumps out of his sleeping bag, he ducks out from under the tarp, and he's looking around on the ground in the immediate vicinity of where he was sleeping to find this flashlight. And as he's looking, out of the corner of his eye, he sees some light. And he turns his head, and in the same direction that he had heard those footsteps, those rustling leaves, when he was still laying down, he sees his flashlight laying on the ground about 10 meters away, which means someone or something had been less than a foot away from him to get this flashlight that was right next to him while he was fast asleep and totally helpless, and had moved it all the way over there. And immediately, Sam thinks to himself, that's a trap. They are trying to lure me away from my campsite. Suddenly, he felt so scared he wanted to vomit, but he knew in order to survive this situation, he needed to keep his wits about him. So he puts his boots on and he grabs his knife, and he knows he's not leaving this campsite. In fact, he's going to build the biggest fire he can. He's going to stoke that fire as big as he can get it, and he's not going to go anywhere near that flashlight. For the next several hours, Sam just stood in the middle of his campsite holding his knife, preparing to confront whatever the heck is out in the woods. And over those several hours, he would hear footsteps approach his campsite, turn around, and leave. Every time the fire got lower, he noticed they would come closer and closer and closer, and when he would stoke the fire, they wouldn't come as close. But at about 3 a.m., he ran out of firewood, so unless he went into the woods to get more, he'd be out, and he's certainly not going into the woods. That's the whole point, is to avoid the woods where this thing is. And so as the fire died down, Sam prepared himself mentally for whatever happened next, because he knew that with that fire gone, this thing was comfortable coming all the way in,
Stress me out.
right next to him to get the flashlight. And so finally, he hears the footsteps approaching. And before this, the closest they had come was maybe about 15 meters away. They were far enough away it didn't feel intimate. It was terrifying, but he had some distance. This time, they walk right up to about 3 meters away, but they intentionally come behind the thickest group of trees, so he can't see them. And it's still dark outside, and he's in that bubble of light near the fire, so he's blind, to whatever's on the other side of those trees. But he knows they're there, and they've stopped. And for 2 hours, this poor kid is standing in the middle of this campsite, facing in the direction of whatever is behind the trees. Probably his imagination is going crazy at this point with what could be behind those trees, just waiting for whatever happened next. But ultimately, the only thing that would happen is the sun would eventually come up, and right before it actually popped over the horizon, this thing on the other side finally moved. It turned around and ran away, and it did not come back. And so when the sun finally did come up, Sam didn't just charge out of there because he's still thinking there could be a trap. He waited until it was totally full sunlight, and then he packed up everything he had, and he practically sprinted back to the parking lot, back into his car, and he drove nonstop for 20 miles until he got to a gas station where he could park and collect himself. And when he got there, he got out of his car, and he went in and he got a drink, and when he came out, he noticed someone had written something on the dust on the back window of his car. And he walks over and it just says, "Sleep well?" ? Sam is confident whoever was stalking him at his campsite is the same person or group of people that wrote this message on his car. And now Sam just wonders, what would have happened if I retrieved that flashlight? So that's going to do it, guys. Let me know in the comments what you...
Nope. Nope. No. Ah. See, that when I go camping, I have this harness thing. My gun sits right here on my chest. Right there. I don't. No, I go out. I have knives. I have a couple of guns. No. No. Not saying that I've ever had to use one to, like, actually hurt someone or anything like that, but there has been times where some animals have gotten a little too close. I don't have time to build a fire, so I'll just, they take off. The same. 9 times out of 10, you don't even got to shoot anything, just shoot up in there, and whatever's around you scrambles away. Gun right here on my chest the whole time. Sleep with that baby. Sleep with that baby. Don't leave me. Nope. All right, let's go to part 3. Let's see if I can. Yeah. Where's part 3? There it is. All right, this year's top 3 scariest places people got stuck. Halloween Scare-A-Thon part 3.
My actual reaction to today's top story when I first learned about it was, oh my god, that might actually be the worst thing that can happen to you. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange delivered in story format, and you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we
I like it already.
upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please kidnap the like button, cover them in barbecue sauce, and then drop them off on the beaches of Niku Island. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. On the evening of February 28, 2013, 37-year-old Jeff Bush was just getting home from his job as a laborer. He walked through the front door of his very modest single-story home in Seffner, Florida, which is just outside of Tampa, and he walked into the kitchen where his sister-in-law and his niece were, and he said hi to them, and he checked in on them. They both lived with Jeff, as did Jeff's brother, Jeremy. After a few minutes of small talk with them, he left the kitchen and went to his own bedroom, the same bedroom he had been sleeping in since he was a little kid. He had grown up in this house. He goes into his room and he hops on the bed, turns on the TV, and looks forward to relaxing for the next couple of hours before going to sleep. A couple of hours later, Jeremy comes home from his second job. He actually worked during the day with Jeff at the same company, but had to pick up additional shifts at night because he needed to support his daughter and his wife. And so he comes home and he goes through the front door and he goes over to Jeff's room and he knocks on the door and he opens it up. And he says, "Hey, Jeff, we don't have work tomorrow. I just found out, so feel free to sleep in tomorrow." Jeff was pretty happy about this, and he said, "Okay, thanks for letting me know." And then Jeremy shut Jeff's door, turned around, and walked out to see his wife and his kid. About an hour later, at 11 p.m., Jeremy, his wife, and his kid are on the other side of the house from where Jeffrey is, and they're laying in bed watching TV when all of a sudden they hear what sounds like a car smashing into the side of the house. It was extremely loud, and immediately Jeremy jumps out of his bed and he hears from the other side of the house Jeff yelling out for help. Jeremy runs into the hall, his wife's right behind him, and there's no damage in the hall, there's no smoke, there's no fire, and they see Jeff's bedroom is still shut, so they run down the hall, they open that door up, and it's dark in his room, and as Jeremy's trying to figure out what he's looking at, his wife reaches behind him and flicks on the switch, and the light from the room illuminates the most bizarre and horrible scene. Jeff, the bedroom, everything, it's all gone, and it's been replaced by this massive sinkhole right in the middle of the room. As Jeff was laying on his bed, apparently the sinkhole had opened up, and when it did, it completely opened up. Jeff fell into it along with everything else in the room, and then it kind of churned on top of him, like it opened its mouth and then squeezed up over him, so that when Jeremy's looking in, it actually looked like a flat layer of dirt. He could only see the corner of a bed poking out. There was no sign of Jeff. He saw the cable from the TV was still coming off the wall and going into the pit and disappearing into the dirt. And so Jeremy starts screaming for Jeff, and he can hear Jeff's muffled screams as he's yelling for him to come save him. And so Jeremy, without any hesitation, jumps into this hole, which right then, it was only about 6 to 10 feet deep. It would end up becoming 60 feet deep over the next couple of days. But initially, it was only about 6 feet deep. He jumps in, and he starts using his hands to try to burrow down to his brother. But for every scoop he was able to remove, about 10 times that would be created as the walls continued to collapse and this hole continued to sink and grow. Jeremy's wife calls the police, and Jeremy gets a shovel, and he goes back into the hole, and he's digging as fast as he can, but he's really making no progress, and he's screaming for his brother, but eventually Jeff's yells for help stop, and he can't hear him, he can't see him, and he's just digging, but he knows he's gone. When the police arrive, they forcibly remove Jeremy from the hole. He did not want to leave his brother. They pulled him out of the house, they pulled his wife and his kid out, and they've evacuated the area. And they had to rope it off because they didn't want anybody going near it because they didn't know how big this hole was going to get. They weren't sure if it was going to suddenly open up and engulf, the whole stretch of the street. And so all of Jeff's family just had to watch in horror as they basically did nothing to try to help him. They had to let the sinkhole basically develop before they were able to actually go in there and try to help him. And so if he had been alive, there was just no way they could have saved him. After several hours, they were able to go up close and feed in this microphone system that they put on top of the actual sinkhole that would apparently be able to pick up sound if Jeff was making any sound whatsoever. And it wasn't picking up any signs of life. And at this point, they determined that he was deceased. But before they could get their audio recorder out of the hole opened up again, got even bigger, and swallowed the recorder into the hole. But despite getting bigger and wider and actually getting big tools in there to start trying to pull stuff out of it, they could never find Jeff's body. And so the decision was made to leave him wherever he is, somewhere in the sinkhole. And they filled it in with gravel, and then they knocked down the house as well as the 2 other neighboring houses. And so to this day, Jeffrey's body is still somewhere underground in that sinkhole.
Oh my God.
In 2000...
That's horrible. What the hell?
2008, Joshua Maddox was an 18-year-old guy living in a small city in Colorado. He was known for having a very carefree attitude. He was kind of a free spirit. He had really long hair. He liked to play the guitar. He loved music. And he spent a lot of his time free writing. His parents were divorced, so Josh lived with his father, whose name was Mike, and his 2 sisters, who were named Kate and Ruth. On May 8th, he told his sister Kate that he was going for a walk as he left the house. Josh loved being out in nature and regularly went out walking around the woods by himself, so this was not out of the ordinary for him. But that night, when he didn't come back, that was out of the ordinary, and the family was pretty concerned. By the next day, when he hadn't shown up and they couldn't get in touch with him, and they called around and no one knew where he was, they would go to the police and file a missing person report. So the police launched this massive search, but there's nothing really to go on besides what he told Kate before he left, which was, "I'm going for a walk." So there wasn't really a good starting point, and so they weren't getting anywhere. As days turned into weeks, turned into months, and no one's heard from him, no one knows what happened to him, Hope was fading that they were going to find him alive. In fact, hope was fading that they were even going to find his body. 7 years after Josh went missing, a startling discovery was made. A builder named Chuck Murphy had this little tiny cabin he owned in the middle of the woods, about a mile away from where Josh's family home was in Colorado. The cabin had fallen into disrepair. At one time, he might have used it, but now the land it was on was much more valuable than the cabin itself. So the decision was made to demolish the cabin and sell the land. And so he brings out a demolition crew. They start knocking down walls. And when they crack open the chimney, when they're standing inside of the cabin and the chimney is now coming down, they see a body crammed into the chimney in the fetal position with its legs over its head. Chuck calls the police, who come over, and they're able to identify this body as being that of Josh Maddox. The cabin had been consistently overlooked during the different searches for Josh because it just didn't look like a place anybody would go. It was like this broken down, caving in pile of wood, and they just kind of wrote it off. No one thought to actually go check it out. Chuck, the owner of the cabin, said that he was really never there, but he had gone in the time between when Josh disappeared and now. And he said when he went inside, there was no signs of anything unusual. It looked like the same old cabin, and he was only in there for a couple of minutes, but he didn't see anything. The autopsy revealed Josh had been wedged inside of this chimney for 7 years, meaning as soon as he went missing, he wound up wedged in the chimney less than a mile from his house. He had no drugs in his system. He had no trauma to his body, so no broken bones or knife marks or gunshot wounds. Initially, authorities said this death was an accident, and what must have happened is Josh came to this cabin and he wanted to get inside. It was locked. And so he thought he would go through the chimney and he got stuck. But Chuck Murphy said, no, that's not possible because I put this really heavy duty rebar cage over the top of the chimney cap to prevent animals and other debris getting inside the chimney. And certainly a person could not have fit through there. However, they couldn't go back and confirm there was indeed this chimney cap because the cabin had already been demolished. In addition to the chimney cap that kind of contradicted this whole accident hypothesis, there were a few other significant unanswered questions about this case. The first one was there was this big breakfast bar, this wooden breakfast bar that was ripped off the wall inside of the cabin and placed up against the fireplace. And if that wasn't there, you would be able to see the underside of Josh because he was tucked up just underneath where you could see. So that means either Josh ripped it off the wall and put it in front of the chimney before going into the chimney, or he was in the chimney and somebody else broke it off and put it in front. The second big question mark is Josh's body position. His legs were over his head, so his position indicates he would have had to go into the chimney head first. And so I don't know about you, but if you were going to go into a chimney, I would not be leaping head first. It just seems counterintuitive and unnecessarily risky. And the third question mark are Josh's clothes, or lack thereof. He was only wearing a shirt. He didn't have pants or underwear or anything else on, just a thermal shirt. And the clothes he didn't have on were neatly folded and stacked inside the cabin next to the fireplace. Meaning, for this to be an accident, he would have had to gain access to the cabin, take off most of his clothing, fold it up, put it next to the fireplace, rip off the breakfast bar, put it in front of the fireplace, go outside, climb onto the roof, rip off the rebar cage, and then only wearing a t-shirt, go head first down a chimney, and then get stuck and die. Very few people, including authorities, buy this is truly just an accident, but they're lacking evidence to suggest it's something else. And so to this day, it remains an accident.
Wow. That is crazy. They shouldn't have finished tearing it down until, no.
On December 6, 1941, 20-year-old U.S. Navy sailor Clifford Olds met up with a couple of his shipmates at the Monkey Bar for a night out in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. A barmaid took this picture of Cliff all the way on the right with his friends and then offered to sell this back to them, to which they said, that's a ripoff, you can keep it. This would be the last picture of Cliff alive. The next morning, just before 8 a.m., Cliff was back on board his ship, the USS West Virginia. He was starting his workday when the Japanese launched the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Cliff's ship was a prime target and was quickly hit with 2 bombs, 7 torpedoes, hundreds of people are dying on board, and very quickly his ship is starting to sink. On board a Navy ship, there's all these different conditions the ship is set to depending on what you're doing, whether you're at war or you're just docked in peacetime, and all of these different conditions have very specific instructions. And one of those conditions is condition Z. Better known as setting Z, if the captain of a ship calls this out over the loudspeakers, every single hatch inside of that ship is shut and locked. If your ship is sinking and you say set Z, you are sealing all of those compartments so no more water can flow into them, and you can maintain a little bit of buoyancy so you don't sink quite as fast. But if you set Z as your ship is sinking, especially if you're getting attacked and there's all these holes in your ship, there's a good chance when you seal those hatches, you're going to be sealing people inside of these rooms and they will not be able to get out again. So when that call comes out over the loudspeakers, set Z, everybody knows to get the heck out of their compartments so that they do not get trapped inside of one of those rooms. On Cliff's ship, set Z was called over the loudspeakers, and Cliff, along with Ron Endicott, who was 18, and Buddy Costin, who was 21, were at the bottom of the ship in the freshwater pump room, and when someone came by and shut and sealed their room, they did not see them in there. And so probably the three of them ran to the door and were banging on it and trying to get someone's attention. But in the chaos of the moment, that person on the other side of the door that could have opened it up again was now gone. Even though the Set Z procedure did prevent water from going into certain cabins on the West Virginia, it still would sink to the bottom of the ocean along with 17 other ships. The next day, there was a whole bunch of Marines that were on the dock right next to where the wreckage of the West Virginia was underneath the water. And as they're standing on the dock, they start hearing a banging sound. And at first, they think it's probably just a salvage team or it's some strap clanging against the side of one of these ships. But they started to notice the tapping sounds started to sound like intentional rhythms that a human might make. And it dawned on them that someone is trying to get our attention underwater. There are people trapped in the West Virginia. But when the Marines ran to their superiors and told them there are people trapped inside of the ship, we have to get them out, they broke the horrible news that there's nothing they could do for them. If they went down and began trying to cut a hole in the side of the ship so they could swim out, as soon as there's even a tiny little hole on the side of that ship, there's so much pressure that it would rush inside and fill that space almost immediately, and they wouldn't be able to cut a hole big enough, fast enough, and so cutting into the ship is going to kill them. Also, just lighting that torch presents a unique problem because there's so many chemicals in the water from all of the attacks that happened the day before, we run the risk of lighting a fire or lighting off an explosion that could take even more life. And because they were still months away from being able to raise the ship out of the water, which would save them, the decision was made that we're going to have to let them die. And so for the next 16 days, Marines and sailors were put on guard duty right next to the wreckage of the USS West Virginia, and they would listen to the tapping as they desperately tried to tell people, come down here, save us, we're alive, we're not going anywhere, please help us. And the Marines and sailors were so distressed about this. It was so horrible to listen to. They would cry and cover their ears because they wanted to save them. They're so close, but they're so far away. Finally, on Christmas Eve, the banging stopped. 6 months later, they were finally able to raise the West Virginia out of the water. And as crews were going through all the different compartments and removing bodies, they got to the freshwater pump room where Cliff, Ron, and Buddy had been. They open it up and they find 3 bodies, and they realize right away the torture these poor guys had gone through. Inside this airtight section was this locker full of food rations. They're also in the freshwater pump room, and so they just opened up the tank and they had all the fresh water they needed. But what they didn't have enough of was air. And so for 16 days, sitting in the dark at the bottom of the ocean, knowing they're not going to get out of here, they slowly suffocated. And we know they were alive for those 16 days because they had a calendar where they were marking off each of the days they were down there in red pen. This story was so distressing, the Navy decided not to share the information about what happened to those 3 to their families. It wasn't until years later the truth came out. But even today, on memorials and monuments commemorating what happened at Pearl Harbor, they are listed, Cliff, Buddy, and Ron are listed as killed in action on December 7th. So that's going to do it, guys. Let me know in the comments what you thought of these 2 stories, and I will pick.
Oh my God. I can't handle that one. All right, we're done. We're done. Yep. That's so sad. Oh my God. They had to be so scared. And half the ones that I was on guard having to hear, oh, don't think I could handle that in any way, shape, or form. No. Alright, we're done. So if you're a fan of the Scary, Spooky, Strange, Strange, think about subscribing. And if you like today's video, think about leaving a thumbs up because, you know, I really want your thumbs. I need them. I'm not kidding. Give me your thumbs. As always, be good to one another. I'll see you in the next one. Stay spooky.